Hello, everybody. I want to welcome you to the final day of ENO's Transit Cost and Project Delivery Symposium. My name is Robert Puentes. I am the president and CEO of ENO, and this has really just been an excellent couple of days. I hope folks have been able to participate in the sessions and the discussions that we've had since Monday. We knew this was going to be a rich conversation, but I've been really pleased with the level of content, not just from the ENO staff and what we've been able to present, but folks who've been doing similar research, the outstanding speakers, and again, really interesting questions and comments and insights from all of the participants. I know we've learned a lot just from the folks who've been participating, and this is what we tried to replicate with this virtual event. So I really appreciate that from everybody, and I'm really looking forward to this particular session. As we all know, transit project delivery is primarily handled by local governments, by local transit agencies. But the federal government plays a huge role in the funding and the overseeing and the permitting of major transit projects. So the goal for this particular session is for participants to understand best practices in federal permitting and project delivery reforms, as well as whatever opportunities may be out there for federal action and funding. As everybody knows, over the last year, we've had a major conversation in this country about infrastructure investments. A lot of that is still ongoing, hopefully resolved pretty soon. But clearly, there's an awful lot going on here at the federal level that's relevant to the stuff we're talking about this week. So we have an excellent panel representing important and related parts of the federal government, and let me just introduce them very quickly. Their full bios are available in the symposium portal. First, we have Jomar Maldonado. He is the director for the National Environmental Policy Act at the Council on Environmental Quality. We have Dana Nefosi. She is deputy chief counsel at the Federal Transit Administration, and Michael Shapiro is deputy assistant secretary for economic policy at the United States Department of Transportation. Welcome, everybody. I really appreciate you taking the time to do this. I know you have an awful lot on your plates, each and every one of you. For participants, please note that all these symposium sessions are being recorded and will be posted, so you can go back and look at the sessions you weren't able to attend, particularly the concurrent sessions. And you can access all of the sessions on the agenda tab to the left of your screen on the Socio platform. After we end this session, you'll be prompted to rate and evaluate the panel. Please do that if you have a chance. We do take those reviews very seriously, and they're very valuable to us. We appreciate your feedback on that. And you can enter questions into the chat at any time during this discussion. We'll take some of those as we go through the panel. So let's just jump into the discussion. I'll direct one question for each of you to answer, and then we'll go more conversational dialogue back and forth. So you each represent different but clearly related areas of the federal government. Of course, as we said, the federal government does not initiate transit projects, but has an obvious interest in making sure that they're delivered on time and delivered on budget. So how do each of you think about your agency or your division's role in transit cost and project delivery? And let's go with just the order I introduced you. We'll start with Joel.
Sure, and hope you're hearing me well. I want to thank for this opportunity to come over and talk a little bit about this important topic. The Council on Environmental Quality is an agency that provides advice to the president and also to the federal agencies on the environmental review process and on environmental policy in general. We are very excited that we are pushing the envelope forward on positions to address climate change and climate crisis. And we think that, for example, investing more in public transportation is going to be one of the key elements into that. So in terms of the question and what our role is, we assist agencies when they have issues related to the environmental review process, particularly with NEPA, the National Environmental Policy Act, and reviews. We serve as a moderator and facilitator whenever there is interagency conflicts that need to be addressed in order to move forward a priority for the administration. I think that CQ has a big role to play, especially in these interagency spaces, as well as opportunities to streamline or to make the environmental review process more efficient, like development of procedures for the agencies, as well as working on individual projects whenever they're raising to the level of national attention.
Thank you for that. Dana.
Thank you. And thank you to Eno for the opportunity to participate in today's panel. FTA, our primary role is to be a federal funding partner. Our statutory programs set forth the requirements that project sponsors need to comply with, but also what FTA needs to comply with, particularly with respect to our capital investment grants program, which probably captures the bulk of the types of projects we're talking about here that are, very high dollar, complicated projects. As a funding partner, one of our early responsibilities in project development are completion of the NEPA evaluation process and 106 and 4F and any other federal environmental requirements, coordinating with our partners like Fish and Wildlife Service, Army Corps of Engineers, other permitting agencies. And, in the CIG pipeline, we're constantly providing technical assistance to the project sponsors regarding, the information needed for us to do the required rating on project justification and financial commitment. We also, before we enter into a full funding grant agreement or a small starts construction agreement, we do risk reviews of the projects to ensure that there's a reasonable schedule for meeting revenue service. Also, there's enough contingency. And also, another critical step is doing a close review of third-party agreements to ensure, that there's compliance with federal requirements, but also, we comment on the adjustment of risk, for example, between many stakeholders in terms of things that will drive schedule and potentially schedule delays. And then finally, after we award a grant, we are involved in project management oversight through the life cycle of construction. So, those are the primary insertion points for FTA in the process.
Excellent. Thank you for that. And Michael.
Great, and just so thrilled to be on a panel here for Eno during the drafting and development of this historic bipartisan legislation that we're hopefully moving towards passing in the near future. We've drawn on Eno's resources, whether it's getting a table late at night from Jeff Davis or reading the reports. And really now that we're thinking so hard about program implementation of this major opportunity, reports like the one that you guys authored on the timeliness and the implementation and high performance of infrastructure projects are going to be invaluable for us and the rest of the federal government as we're thinking hard about how to make the best use of these dollars. The truth is we're on the cusp of a historic investment in transit that our department is going to lead, the largest in American history, and it's really incumbent on us to spend it well. We are past the time where we can adjust those top lines, which are significant, $39 billion in new transit funding. So every dollar we can save on costs is a dollar we can commit to expansion and to better service. And we really appreciate Eno's recommendations on governance, on process, and on standards. It's enormously helpful, and it makes us focus on kind of state capacity. I'd go a step further to anyone in the audience. Come join us, send us your advice. This is a historic moment. We need the best ideas from within the United States and internationally, because our transit infrastructure today is inadequate. It's got a multi-billion-dollar repair backlog, 24,000 buses, 5,000 rail cars, 200 stations. We have an enormous amount of work to do and a generational opportunity to do it. So obviously you've heard from the FTA side. At OST, or the Office of the Secretary of Transportation, where I sit, our role is really to set department-wide policy, look across modes, and ensure we're delivering projects and working with our state and local partners to deliver projects on time and on budget is a key priority for us, not only within FTA, but across the entire set of discretionary and formula programs that the Infrastructure and Jobs Act will bring. To that end, I'd offer three kind of high-level principles in response to the question how we can ensure high performance. One of the department's 6 core strategic principles is operational excellence. That includes accountability at the federal, state, and local level for high performance. And you're going to see us build high performance in a lot of the recommendations into each of our NOFOs, our funding agreements, our guidances, our rules and regulations. Second, we're going to be engaging in deep outreach with our state partners state departments of transportation, transit agencies, and local governments that are going to have new opportunities to receive grant funds. We obviously have a mayor as secretary, a head of a local DOT as deputy secretary, and a lot of new potential grant recipients. And we have new administrative resources under EJA. We're going to stand up teams on key projects that cross modes and actively work at the state and local level to build up compelling projects and provide technical assistance. And we're also going to be continuing to support research and best practices. Again, it's a huge moment to change the way we're delivering our infrastructure. We want to crowd in the best ideas and build them into our programs. And again, appreciate Eno's work here and all the expertise that are brought to bear, and excited for the panel as we focus on this space.
Thank you for that, each of you, and thank you, Michael, for the nice words. And for folks listening, we've heard those themes from a lot of folks on the federal side, that they're certainly looking for your ideas and your advice. And I think there's a lot of receptive ears over there right now. So definitely take Michael up on that request. Let me stick with you a little bit, Mike, just to dive into the IIJ a little bit more. If you kind of ran through the numbers, if this thing passes, when this thing passes, excuse me, there's going to be an awful lot, across the federal government. Most agencies are going to be thinking about these big capital programs. The principles and the themes you just walked through, are those applicable across the government? How are you thinking about that widely, even beyond transit? And what can transit learn then from other areas of those federal capital investments?
Yeah, it's a really great question. And I think there's a lot of learning to do from how we implement these kind of major investments government-wide. And implementation is really top of mind for DOT and for the federal government overall. And it's really important just to think about the scope of this investment. At just DOT alone, we have an additional around $40 billion for transit and hundreds of billions of dollars in formula and discretionary funding from reauthorization, as well as advance appropriations in this bill. I think in terms of discretionary funding, Eno's own Jeff Davis calculated there's more than $100 billion in discretionary funds. That's almost as much or more cash on the balance sheet than the biggest companies in the world: Amazon, Microsoft, Google, Facebook. They've got around $100 billion in cash. So it's a truly generational opportunity. I think the good news is that we bring a great deal of experience. The president himself was in charge of implementing the last major discrete investment in American infrastructure in ARA. The leadership in the White House, up to Ron Klain and Brian Deese, were there for the first time and have been very focused as we've been developing this legislation on ensuring we can deliver with high performance. And then within DOT, folks like our deputy secretary, our undersecretary, Amit at FRA, we're all here during that implementation and can kind of think hard about the lessons. And even though the bill hasn't passed yet, we're getting ready. We're working internally on key priorities. We're organizing to meet them. And we're also coordinating through an interagency process. Specifically, here are some of the things that we're going to do, and I think organizing priorities in kind of three different ways. First, the bipartisan plan has a great deal of new resources and new responsibilities for our modes. For FHWA, that's programs like EV charging and bridges. For FTA, that's CIG, a new ASAP program that focuses on accessibility, and others on basic maintenance. For FRA, there are historic investments in the Northeast Corridor and the National Network, and even within an OST, we've got a new mega projects program. We're gaming out kind of all of the outcomes that we want to leave behind after the 5 to 7 years that we're going to try and spend out this money, all of the statutory deliverables, and we're preparing to kind of scale up staffing and resources to be ready. In addition to kind of getting the modes ready and really kind of preparing those priorities, we're thinking about a set of cross-cutting issues that go between our modes. And this is where I think it's most important to learn from other agencies, especially as they've kind of done interagency projects or interagency work. We're thinking about kind of accountability for project management, technical assistance to state and local partners, permitting, working with CEQ are all part of these kind of cross-cutting areas. We've identified about a dozen of them where you will see us set up work kind of across our modes for effective implementation. And third, there are imperatives around our state and local partners, working with Congress on ensuring continued appropriations, engagement with stakeholders in labor and management to kind of crowd in additional resources, and our external affairs, communications, and congressional relationships and IGA teams are going to have to really communicate all of this. So I think the answer is we have a veteran team who's been through past implementations and a wide variety of departments. We know the kind of importance of these cross-cutting areas around higher performance and standards, and we're gearing up both on a mode-by-mode basis and in a cross-cutting basis and an external basis to be ready.
Got it. And we had Deputy Secretary Trottenberg on a different panel a few weeks ago, and she talked about some of the RRL lessons, and she was obviously there, that go around, and the scale of those discretionary programs it's massive, completely different. I think it was $2 billion for Tiger back then. As you mentioned, it was $100 billion now. It's just the scale is so different. So we look for those lessons too. I'm going to stick in some of the current programs that we have right now. And Dana, I want to shoot one over to you. The FAST Act authorized a program called the Expedited Project Delivery Pilot Program, which was aimed at speeding up transit projects, mostly by encouraging, I think, innovative kind of partnerships. So, what do we know how well that program has worked or is working, and what lessons do we have from that for the conversations we're having today?
Okay. Well, the program is still early in implementation. We have one project that has applied and is working its way through the program, and we've received indication from another transit agency that they anticipate that they're going to be submitting an application to the program in the near future. Some of the challenges for the program that we've heard are the requirement that it's a statutory requirement that the transit agency has to operate the project once it's built. And that's a challenge because there's a P3 elements to the EPD program. And oftentimes that the way the P3 is integrated into a project is through construction, operation, and maintenance. And so without that operation component, I think there have been challenges in identifying P3 opportunities. But also in the P3 context, sort of a timing issue, because the application process is expedited. There's a 120-day review period for FTA to make a thumbs up, thumbs down decision on a project once an application is submitted. The P3 needs to be pretty well baked at that point. And so it becomes a little bit of a chicken and egg on, are you going to get FTA approval, but the P3 needs to show some commitment, prior to the application submission. So there's a timing issue. Also, the 120-day review period requires that before submission of an application, there is a ton of coordination between the project sponsor and FTA. So it's too early I think, to have really many lessons learned because we don't have one that's crossed the finish line yet. But I think an interesting data point is going to be forgetting the actual FTA approval timeline, but from start to finish of the project, is this process going to save money or save time? In the whole life cycle of project development to construction. And I think we just don't have enough information at this point to see how it's going to play out.
Understood. And do you think if IIJA passes that there's going to be more opportunities, or is it, how do you think that would play out?
Yeah, I think so. It's sort of the history of the EPD program demonstrates some of the challenges because it actually was created in MAP 21. And we had put out a notice of funding opportunity, but then the FAST Act changed some of the criteria, so we had to pull it back and start over again. So there's some fits and starts in the early stages of the program. I do expect, certainly as this whole symposium and your report demonstrates, there's a constant I don't think never-ending drumbeat to try to streamline projects and the federal approval process and then, construction. So there's, whether it's EPD exactly as it is now or, changing implementation in the future, I think there's always going to be a drive to figure out where that sweet spot is going to be.
Got it. Yeah, definitely looking forward to that. Thank you for that. And Jomer, one other one for you then for kind of an existing program. The last administration's one federal decision was aimed at improving coordination on project review by, among other things, by designating a lead federal agency to navigate the project through the environmental review process. And when we started this work, everybody said, oh, well, the number one reason for these delays is the environmental review process. Everybody believed that going in. And as we were doing work, we found that, well, there's lots of other things too. But we also found, I think, general agreement that the one federal decision hasn't really had the impact that folks have thought it might, maybe for the same kind of reasons. So it was revoked by the Biden administration, but incorporated most recently into it a new, I think, revised implementing regulation. So what's different about it this time around? What's the same, and what do you think we can look forward to in the future with regard to the one federal decision and that whole line of thinking about how to speed things up?
Yeah, so there are a lot of ideas that have been provided over the years that to improve coordination, and even the CQ regulations have established the concept of a lead agency, and we think that there is a lot there that has not been taken advantage of. Lead agency, the schedule coordination elements that are important to ensure that environmental reviews are done in a timely and efficient manner, right? That they contain, they consider input from outside entities, not just the public, but also local agencies. As you pointed out, a lot of in the public transportation sector, there's a lot of involvement from the locals. The locals agencies are the drivers, but there's a lot of local agencies too that have some elements that need to be coordinated in the NEPA review process. Looking at your report, there's many other aspects in the project delivery that affect the project. It's not just environmental review. And we think that there's an opportunity here to explore how we can utilize NEPA and the environmental review to address or help out in the decision making, and also incorporate some of these coordination elements with utility relocations and acquisitions, with some of the changes that occur in a project inevitably throughout the process. We're looking at the regulations that were issued in the previous administration, and identifying how we can make the regulations basically better in terms of considering environmental factors, better decision making, incorporating better the public input. Right now, we have a rulemaking process where we're focused on two phases. In phase one, we're doing some targeted changes to improve some of the foundational elements of the environmental review process, ensuring that we are taking into account, and we have we've been very transparent in this administration, taking into account climate change and how climate change should be addressed in NEPA reviews, taking into account public input, making sure that we're really making investments just for an environmental perspective, that are just for our all communities, not just certain populations, but all populations. These changes that we're doing in phase one are the basis, the foundational elements. We are hoping to move into a phase two that looks at it on a broader perspective, all the regulations, look at all the changes that were done in the previous administration, but also go back and recognize that there's a rich history of streamlining efforts that have occurred in the past. What have we learned from that? What can be implemented to assist in the delivery of this generational investment that we are about to do? So we're working on that. We're working on those phases of the rulemaking, hopefully having them available as soon as we can, so that we can apply for this investment, as well as looking at other opportunities that may be beyond the regulatory framework of NEPA, like permitting approaches to coordination of the different environmental reviews that occur, as well as how do you consider greenhouse gas and resilience is a big element. And finally, justice, environmental justice, and how do we deliver at least 40 of the benefits through communities that are low-income minority populations and those that are being underserved.
a major element of the review process is the EJ piece. I don't think people talk about it as much. This administration clearly is. Let me stick with it just for one more. We're talking about transit projects here. Obviously, NEPA and CEQ, looks across lots of different projects. In our work, we recommended, or we thought about maybe that transit projects could be treated differently since they are designed to have a positive effect on GHGs and climate and everything else. Are there other investments or infrastructure investments that are treated differently, or how does CEQ think about infrastructure investments on the federal level, or are they just the same kind of thing, just with different outcomes? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does make sense. That's one of the things that we're looking at. What are the potential areas that we could be more targeted in our coordination and our also our efforts to make the process more efficient. I think this administration obviously has put their line on the sand and said this administration is focused on environmental justice. We're focused on climate change and addressing the climate crisis, and activities and projects that would pursue those efforts are going to be something that this administration is going to be putting a big priority. Public transportation, fits into that bill, as well as renewable energy projects, those big projects that allow us to move away from our decarbonize our energy production, our transmission. Is another big area. Even in the transportation, or just staying in the transportation, the electric vehicle and other sources that help us move away from those types of activities that do put out a lot of greenhouse gases, and those that can actually help communities build back better, be more resilient. Those are going to be the things that we're going to be looking at and determining and figuring out whether there's approaches that we can take to facilitate those projects, to bring them in faster and also more inclusive of input from the public and agencies.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a good point. And again, back to the point about, NEPA covers more things than just GHGs, right? All those kinds of negative impacts on communities, on people, all the EJ work too. So, transit projects are not immune from those kinds of criticisms too, right?
Yep. If I could just add, 95% of FTA projects are covered by categorical exclusions now. They're not huge projects, which require generally an EIS or an EA, but the vast majority of our projects are covered already by categorical exclusions. And we also, as well as FHWA, work with resource agencies to develop programmatic agreements and things like that can also streamline the review process for projects that do, require a more in-depth review, like an EA or an EIS.
So why would a transit project not receive a categorical exclusion?
If it's new right of way, if it's the NEPA standard is if it is, may have a significant impact on the environment. So by definition, CEs have there are two types, C list and D list. The C list ones are listed in our regulation, and those based on a lot of data on past projects and vetting by CEQ have been determined that they do not have a significant effect on the environment. So D-list projects are ones that on a case basis you determine whether they're likely to or not. But so for, as I said, for new fixed guideway systems or extensions of an existing system that are going to be impacting new right of way, that is very likely to be not going to be able to be covered by a CE, and that ends up being a lot of our big CIG projects.
Yeah, one thing I just add in here, and as we think about this, there's so much, some obviously appropriate focus on just kind of the complexity of projects and how do we get them done faster. I think as we think about all of these efforts to kind of prioritize and accelerate, whether it's permitting or an environmental review or all the kind of different stages of the projects, we really do have to focus on the potential benefits that these projects can bring, which are massive, right? Like if you're talking about rail and diverting, and that can bring greenhouse gas, that can bring accessibility to low-income communities, so can transit, so can EV charging, so can all of this. And focusing less a little bit on saying, okay, we're going to prioritize review because this project is overly complex. We're going to focus it on the projects that have the most impact on those kind of core outcomes that we want to do and accelerate and focus on how do we achieve them is, I think, kind of critically important to kind of bring us out of the weeds of some of that. And then throughout the EJA legislation, there are new kind of statutory changes to the review process that we're going to have to collectively kind of grapple with around, schedules for EISs, requirements for documents, limits, requirements on agencies to cooperate, and a lot of kind of transparency and reporting back to the committees on how we're implementing it. So there are tools within EJA and within existing laws if we can coordinate right, but really centering that prioritization on saying, look, we're not just doing it to check these boxes, but doing this review and prioritizing this review in a thoughtful way that's going to, benefit equity, benefit the environment, and benefit and create, thousands of new good-paying jobs is I think an important way to think about what the ultimate outcome and the ultimate goals are here.
Yeah, I'm really glad you brought that up. That's something that we found in our work. It was hard to articulate, but this is mostly from the from case studies and looking at Western Europe and looking at other places, and how they even think about transit projects is very different than how we do it here. And they're much more less sensitive to disruptions, like in a neighborhood or something, because they know they're getting these great transit projects, and they're willing to accept it, and they move things along. And it's a very different construct here, where it's a lot of the mitigation, it's a lot of the negative things. It feels like we're still trying to sell people on the value of these investments, when in other countries it's much more apparent. And I think that making that case is less a burden on them than it seems to be here. It's hard for us to quantify that and to articulate it, but that was definitely a common theme that we saw coming up. I think it's to your point, Mike.
I think it's really important. We've been promising, we make the joke about, people underrate, I think, in government, some of the kind of sales and the kind of passion around it, in the sense that this is a real opportunity. We've been promising infrastructure week after infrastructure week after infrastructure week. Finally, it may be here that we get one of the largest investments since the construction of the interstate highway system. We really do have to make a consistent and passionate. I know it can feel kind of like a sideshow to the like, how we're going to actually get this done, but really making a consistent and passionate sales pitch for the benefits of this and the benefits of achieving these outcomes, I think actually gets into not just being a kind of case of theater or salesmanship, but into the substance of how we build public support. Because ultimately, this is a 5-year piece of legislation with advanced appropriations and with funding. If we want to continue making these investments and continue getting the funding for it, we're going to need to make that sales pitch. We're going to need to make significant progress in red states and blue states and across the country.
Without question. I look forward to getting back to that part of the conversation. It does feel like we're bogged down in Senator this and Senator that, and I wish we getting back to the substance of what's in here, I think, is really important.
Yes.
Dan, let me go back to you just for a second. You triggered something I was thinking about it with the federal transit's role in particular in all this. I think when we talk to folks, when we go out, and I think there's an assumption that the Federal Transit Administration is the one that has the ability to loosen all this up and to make things done faster, better, quicker, cheaper, and everything else. But there's limitations, obviously, to what the FTA can do. Can you describe kind of where you're limited in these cases and just how you think about those kinds of constraints?
Sure. Let me start with the positive side of the question, is what we can do. And, as we've ticked through some of these already, the environmental review process, trying to ensure greater collaboration with the resource agencies on the front end. For example, several years ago, we entered into a memorandum of understanding with the Coast Guard to try to ensure better coordination through the NEPA process and marry it up with the Coast Guard permitting process so that we're not redoing or raising new issues in the Coast Guard permitting process. So that's the sort of thing that, I think the permitting dashboard also facilitates that. But then the next step is these MOUs. Another is, as I had identified, the technical assistance aspect to project sponsors, working on risk review and project readiness to make sure we have reasonable cost, scope, and schedule estimates that are then put into our grant agreements. And then, during construction, our project management oversight contractors who are, not just ticking the boxes on when, there's a potential non-compliance issue with, say, Buy America, but also identifying when there are conflicts amongst the construction partners and trying to facilitate some resolutions there as well that can remove some bottlenecks. Our regional administrators play a big role in that, as does our Office of Program Management. What we can't do is we can't control local politics. Elections where you have city councils or other leadership that change and are no longer supportive of a project, and we can't control local funding sources. We can certainly try to create some incentives. And another in the can column is we have an update to our CIG policy guidance is due, and we've just recently issued a request for information from transit industry to solicit ideas as to where our transit partners want to see changes in the CIG guidance, recognizing that we're constrained by statute. We have to be consistent, but there is some room for revision. So, actually, another can't is we can't control courts. Courts. We do get sued on occasion, and generally we are very successful because we've made sure that on the front end in NEPA that we've done a thorough analysis, and generally courts don't revoke our records of decision, which puts a hard stop on projects, but there are a few outliers there. And even when we prevail on appeal, that still takes years. So that's another one that we can't, we only have so much we can do about that.
I think there's a misconception about the federalist structure and how that actually plays out. And there are lots of different players. Federal government's obviously important, but it's not the only thing. And a couple of folks are asking, and I was remiss to say this at the beginning, the permitting dashboard you mentioned. Can you describe that a little bit more, kind of what that is? Maybe Jomar, obviously, I think in your case too.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, Jomar, you can go ahead.
So back in the during the Obama administration, there was an effort to be more transparent, and there were a few agencies, including the transportation Department of Transportation, that got together and developed a permitting dashboard with the idea to show where the projects were located. This evolved with the passage of the FAST Act, where there was the creation of the Federal Permitting Improvement Steering Council, and then there was funding also to enhance what's called the permitting dashboard, and it's at performance.permits.gov, where you go in and you identify and you can see projects that are transportation projects that are big transportation projects and where they are in their environmental review, not only located, but where in the process time-wise are these projects. And it also includes other projects that are major infrastructure projects identified in that legislation under the FAST Act. So it is a great visualization tools to identify where projects are, but also where in time in the process there are within that environmental review process.
Yeah, I think we have about 266 active projects in the dashboard. 42 have an EIS, NEPA action. 220 have an environmental assessment. So it's a great resource to kind of track the progress. Although I would note, and this is something I feel like I've asked for a lot, and asked a lot of different agencies, of like having really great national project inventories is, I think, something we could work on relative to our international peers that really integrate all of these resources. Because I remember being asked during the drafting of this legislation, many times from many different parties, like, well, where's the pipeline of projects? And it is actually surprising the lack of an integrated project pipeline. Rice University and Henry Cisneros did a really great job of that, but having a kind of national project pipeline, like I think they've put together at Infrastructure Ontario up north and in other places, is like a really valuable thing. Of course, there's a challenge of with the new programs that are coming online, it's hard to have a pipeline for programs that haven't existed in the past. So it is a balance.
Yeah, Infrastructure Ontario is a good example. In fact, the work that we were doing, we recommended that states start to look at this too, maybe having their own permitting councils, permitting dashboards, especially a place like California with an awful lot of rules and regulations, some that are stronger than the rules on the federal level. That it might behoove a place like California to be doing this. And I think to your point, it's not foreign. It's not unknown. Localities have capital improvement plans. States do this all the time. So, that inventory, I think, is out there. It's just a matter of kind of pulling it together and coordinating it, and then learning from each other. And Joe Morrow's question I had for you was about CEQ and kind of where you sit over on top of all these agencies. It's not just transportation, as we talked about. You have it coming in from all kinds of different agencies, all kinds of rules and regs. Do you find that there are things that conflict, things that overlap? Because again, it's not just it's infrastructure, but they're all in these different silos. Do you see those conflicts, and if so, how do you reconcile those?
Yeah, you see it in different ways, and thank God for NEPA that allows us to figure out those conflicts and help navigate through them. When I say in different ways, you do have missions that are different, right? Agencies have respond to their particular mandates on statute, and you may run into situations where there's a requirement, there's a project being pushed, but then there's a requirement for an agency that you need to look into the minimum, the one that reduces the amount of impacts on water or on endangered species, and you have to resolve that conflict with the project that you want to provide, and also how do you resolve it within that context of that particular law. You also see it with conflicts in projects, and before NEPA, there was a lot of conflicting project types where for one particular region, maybe the Corps of Engineers was pushing a particular project and transportation was pushing another project, and they just create big problems for the environment because there was no coordination level or element associated. Now at the CEQ level, just like you mentioned, we are in a privileged position that we can see those conflicts and we can act in and step in whenever there is an interagency type of a conflict in missions and conflicts in projects to help navigate through those and help us achieve, like Mike was saying, the ultimate goal. What is the ultimate elements that we're trying to achieve here and meet the administration's agenda? There's a lot of best practices that we also rely on and we push. One example is FTA and consideration of greenhouse gases. They did a programmatic evaluation, and we thought that that's a great way of looking at the problem and looking at the issue that could be replicated in other agencies on how they consider greenhouse gas in their decisions, emissions in their decisions, as well as resiliency. So we also play a role of trying to push best practices that we learn from each one of these agencies in these other sectors to try and improve the overall delivery of projects for transportation and other projects as well.
I'm glad you mentioned that too. That's a good segue into another question I had here in the hopper about, we have seen that just this really just an insatiable demand for places to learn from one another. And especially now with so much experimentation and so much activity going on, we play a big role in that here at with folks asking us to connect us to these people. How do we know about this? How do we facilitate, or how can the federal government facilitate that kind of cross learning, either between agencies or up and down, or vertically, maybe between the federal government and cities, states, and metros? Can you be a little more specific on what the federal role could be in that, Gilmar? And then Michael, I think also the same question for you, if you can.
Yeah, I think that now we're seeing a lot more centers of excellence, or places that where that can occur. The Federal Permitting Improvement Steering Council is one entity that has been fomenting and collecting best practices and helping out with dissemination of those efforts, at least at the federal government level. The report that you guys did, Robert, was good in mentioning, look, that similar to that, there could be something at the state level that allows for collaboration, that allows for best practices to be provided and be disseminated. I know the Department of Transportation has a policy group that deals with, at least on the project delivery, specifically on environmental review, that also collects best practices and pushes best practices, and is at the forefront of that sharing of ideas. In the administration, we always receive from groups, and we're always looking at groups that are developing, think tanks that are developing ideas and concepts, and try to push them, trying to disseminate it. But I do agree that there may be some further opportunities to connect, not just think tanks and particular industry sectors, but also state and locals. There's a lot of knowledge at the state and local level that could be brought in at the federal level, as well as in the tribal sector. That we can push out and ensure that we're all benefiting from each other's information and intelligence that we have collected over the years on different aspects of the project delivery process.
Yeah, completely echo that. There's obviously great resources and great teams within DOT at our Build America Bureau, on our permitting, where we participate in the Permitting Council. I think a theme that comes through in the report talking about kind of best practices is really looking internationally. This is something that I'm particularly passionate about. In a prior life, I spent a lot of time as an infrastructure investor up north of the border in Canada. And I do think we have a lot to learn from our international peers. And that's not countries that like have different systems of government. That's countries that are our liberal peers that have labor unions, strong environmental standards, very old cities to tunnel through or build through that are around the world. And there are many resources even within the United States federal government that can encourage those relationships and data gathering. Within DOT, our OSTX, which is Aviation and International Affairs, engages with a range of foreign partners in international processes. They have goals around kind of introducing the U.S. government and DOT's renewed international efforts under the Biden administration, gaining recognition in our operating administrations on international engagement. We have an MOU with the government of Japan on safety guidance related to rail. We have an MOC with and have worked and researched kind of the Canadian government's infrastructure bank in developing the Build America Bureau. But I think as part of EJA implementation, we really do need to ramp up building on those kind of successful efforts within the department and within the government to learn from international best practices. Because I think, as your report makes clear, we often do kind of underperform our international peers. And so, we're going to be looking at reviewing the literature and conducting expert outreach on international best practices, kind of reaching out to like-minded partners to bring practitioners together, and then really think about some of the best practices that we can bring in. Because I think, it's really important, as we've heard on the panel, to do that on a kind of intergovernmental, state and local way. But we have so much to learn from our international peers who have demonstrated kind of great outcomes here, and even in ways that are really importantly not sacrificing kind of community input, environmental input, strong kind of job growth and labor protections as well.
I'm glad you mentioned that. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I wanted to chime in just to note, not to be a wet blanket, but FTA used to have an international research program, which Congress repealed in MAP 21. And that's how we used to do studies on international project delivery. So in recent years, we've been more participatory, participating in things like APTA international missions, where we tag along and observe. We've served on panels. There are a lot of conferences that have an international component, so we've served on project delivery panels with representatives from the UK, Asia, and Europe. And we have on the construction side, we have a lessons learned page on our website. And every year we have an annual construction workshop with state and local entities where a component of that is sharing best practices in construction. So, but on the international side, we've had to, from an authorization and appropriation standpoint, we've had to change our role a little bit since MAP 21.
Yeah, I believe Edo had a role to play in coordinating some of those.
Yes.
Tours. So before I got here, unfortunately, but I know that those have been effective, and we still talk to people who've been through those study tours. They can be extremely valuable for folks, and we know that they still work together. They still share ideas, and to Michael's point, it's not just the best practices, but they want to know what went wrong. How do we prepare for things when something inevitably goes awry? How do you do crisis management? All that kind of stuff really doesn't just live in that moment. It actually lives throughout these people's professional careers, and it's that kind of cross pollination. I think that's really important. The federal government can certainly provide a lot of expertise and a lot of advice on. But it's also, I think, domestically too, and we do some of these. And Jomar, something that keeps coming up is, the NEPA process is complex and cumbersome. Do you do things to convene, I guess, for lack of a better term, NEPA professionals and folks who live and breathe this stuff like you do, so that they can share best practices, ideas, and ways to navigate it?
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of opportunity there. We have at the federal side, we put together NEPA contacts meetings every quarter to talk about what's out there, what's new, some lessons learned. But I think that there's definitely some opportunities that we can reach out to other, like at the state level. I know Texas has a very big program, California, and we have opportunities there to reach out and collaborate and do some exchanges on best practices. One thing that I really liked on the report and the recommendations is this idea of better training. Developing some convening opportunities to get practitioners together and have some training and exchanges that could help further the goals that we're trying to push, reducing the costs, reducing timelines, but also doing better decisions for the communities and smarter projects. And I think that's a great a suggestion and an idea that we should probably explore more on the federal side.
Yeah, I don't know if it's because we did some of our interviews with folks during this time of COVID, but the demand and out there for people to do face-to-face kind of meetings and to meet with their peers was really just off the charts. We do some of that. The federal government can do some of that, but that's certainly something that we identified as a need for all the reasons we just mentioned, for places to learn from one another. And that leads to one more question I want to make sure I asked, and for anybody is, and this is a theme that's come up literally every day in this symposium we've had this week, and almost every single panel, is around local staff capacity. Is there that because transit agencies or local governments aren't doing these things routinely, they have to staff up, and there's a big workforce challenge now, as we all know. Do you have any ideas of what the federal government can do to be helpful in that regard? Is there any ways to boost local capacity coming out of Washington to identify this real problem? For anybody who wants to answer.
I think FTA's role currently, Jomar made mention of one of the tools that we've developed that state and local entity transit agencies can use is our greenhouse gas estimator. It's a tool that you can use when you don't have the technical capacity or the funds to hire your own consultant to do. Similarly, we have what we call the STOP model for ridership estimates, and that we've is demonstrated in our before and after studies that we've done on projects lately has proven to be a very good tool for estimating ridership from a new project. So I think from we other than funding, that the way that we FTA can help is to generate more tools that can be used for components of the approval process.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this to me was one of the core themes that came out of Eno's report, is just having experienced local project partners and implementers, small dedicated teams who know the contracting, are empowered to deliver is kind of a critical thing for delivering infrastructure projects. I would say the good news is within the administration, this is a top priority that we are thinking about, and it's very challenging. But whether it's our deputy secretary, my colleague Robin Hutchison, who's our DAS for safety, ran Minneapolis's transportation department. Sam Silverberg over at the White House was a local transit agency person as well. We know how critical this is, and especially as we're thinking about getting kind of new partners for some of our grant programs. A couple of observations. The EJA legislation does open up new grant programs to new grant recipients that they can take advantage of. There's a Safe Streets for All program that's eligible for local governments. There's a Smart Grants program that can be for some of the more kind of innovative approaches to transportation. So there is new funding that non-traditional recipients who probably need the most help building up capacity are going to do. But I think we're thinking this is one of those kind of cross-cutting areas that we're thinking about. We want to build new capacity and structure for TA within the department, whether that's FTA in the modes or within the office of the secretary. We want to kind of give that technical assistance kind of earlier in the process. We want to think about developing kind of augmented relationships with some of those non-traditional recipients that are going to be scaling up, and really focusing on empowering kind of whether it's tribes, rural communities, Justice 40 communities, providing training and technical assistance as well to kind of all of those, and then lifting up a variety of examples and kind of compiling them. But to the point about this is a great opportunity to kind of come in, go to work for local agencies, go to work for the government. Capacity building is and getting those people and that experience in place and giving them the resources they need. Put aside all the NOFOs and guidance and laws and regulations. It's going to be the people running these projects who determine whether we're successful or not in the outcomes that we want. So it's critically important and top of mind.
Great.
Yeah, indeed, and not just the new programs, but just if there is a whole lot, when there is a whole lot more money coming out of the legislation, more demand for more people at a time where we do have this workforce shortage across the transportation space. It's going to be something we're definitely going to have to wrestle with, and it's going to take these kinds of partnerships. So again, we're just about out of time. So I really want to just thank you so much, Michael and Jomar and Dana, for taking the time. Again, as I said, you have a lot flat on your plate, and I'm glad you're able to share your thoughts and experiences with us here. And for folks who are watching, as I said, this session will be posted up on our symposium website and made available for folks. And I'll just leave you one last thing. Please do take Michael's suggestion seriously, and for everybody here. This administration I know was looking for ideas, looking for partnerships. So don't be shy in reaching out if you have the opportunity. So again, thank you to our panelists. Thank you everybody for participating, and have a wonderful afternoon.
Thanks.
So long.